the sacred presence of the one who said he would abide in his teaching be our guide. May we follow his glorious example and tread with unfaltering step this noble path until we too shall attain enlightenment. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna paramita. So good evening again. I'm still adjusting to, can I just confess, I'm still adjusting to this new way of giving a Dharma talk and seeing all of you and little squares on my screen and talking to my living room. Thank you for joining me. My talk is called Touching Joy and Appreciation, Touching Appreciation and Joy. And the inspiration for this talk is our discussion from last week of the chapter from Thicht Naht Hanh's book that we've been going through, The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings. And the chapter was entitled, if you recall, for those of you that, which was most of you that were part of that discussion, the title was, Is Everything Suffering? And Thicht Naht Hanh offered some responses to that. And it seems like a worthy question of investigation, given that he makes the point there's a lot of emphasis on dukkha and suffering in practice. But also here we are in this really unusual time that we're living through, where here we are in the midst of a global pandemic and tremendous upheaval around addressing racial inequity, striving for racial justice. And with these circumstances we find ourselves in, we then personally absorb that and feel that in different ways at different times. I think there's a kind of, for me, it feels like a kind of unique stress that we're carrying with the kind of shifting sands that we're standing on in the world. And this stress playing in the background for many of us, with some concerns about the pandemic. And if we're not concerned about our own health, we're concerned about loved ones. And so there's this all that we are sort of steeped in right now, this really unique historic time that we're living through. And even beyond that, there's just a lot of loss right now, loss of activity, loss of things that being able to see people freely and in touch with loved ones the way that we'd like to. And I don't know how to put this in. It's the loss around having added anxiety for everyday activities. So the added stress of weighing going to the supermarket, and is this a good time to go, and all of these things. So here we are in the midst of this. So we can ask ourselves that question: Is everything suffering? Is everything dukkha? And honestly, this feels like a talk I just wrote because I need to hear it, right? To be able to remember how we turn ourselves towards joy and appreciation. And the short answer to the question, is everything suffering, is no. In one sense. There's joy and appreciation that is available all the time. So that's what we're going to turn our attention to tonight. Specifically, how do we hold both? How do we turn towards both of those things, towards joy and appreciation? So I'm going to get there in kind of a zigzagular fashion. I want to share a story. So I'm going to kind of make a little left turn here and share a story that might not be obvious that it touches on this concept, but I love this story. And if you haven't, some of you I'm sure have heard this. It's the story of the tigers and the strawberry. And it's just like an old Zen story. I don't even know that, so old I don't think they can attribute it to a specific author. And I'm going to read this. This comes from the book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, which is just a classic book of Zen stories. So I'm going to just read this short paragraph. It's about 5 lines. So, a man traveling across a field encountered a tiger. He fled. The tiger came after him. Coming to a cliff, coming to a precipice, he caught hold of the root of a wild vine and swung himself down over the edge. So you imagine the tigers chased him. He's hanging on by this wild vine. The tiger sniffed at him from above. Trembling, the man looked down to where, far below, another tiger was waiting to eat him. Only the vine sustained him. 2 mice, one white and one black, little by little, started to gnaw away at the vine that he's holding on to. The man saw a luscious strawberry near him. Grasping the vine with one hand, he plucked the strawberry with the other. How sweet, how sweet. So this talk is about that moment of tasting the strawberry, right? Tigers below, tigers chasing you off the cliff, and that moment. There's another version of the story where the person holding onto the vine just lets go, and grabs that strawberry. So it's turning towards that moment. It's available to us all the time. So we're going to come back to this idea of that moment of tasting the strawberry. So I'm going to talk a little bit. One of the things that came up for me when we talked last week was kind of ways that we frame practice. So I'm going to take another turn here. And Kevin used to talk about like Dharma and practice, and he'd say that, it's like there's different ways to cut the tomato. Some of you probably heard that analogy. So you can slice the tomato different ways, and you can look at it different ways. So I'm going to present one way of looking at practice, not the only way, just one way that I'm kind of framing it for myself based on some thoughts that came up last week. So one way we can think of practice, or I think of my own practice, is dividing it into sort of 3 kinds of efforts. So that first effort is examining dukkha, examining our suffering, examining what causes our suffering and suffering of others. And then the second one, and I'm going to touch on each of these a little bit. The second one is acceptance. So it's another aspect of practice, acceptance. And that came up in our discussion too. And then the last one is cultivating joy and appreciation. So I think of those as 3 different and related kinds of practices. So that first one, just going to say not as much, but a little bit about this practice of examining our suffering. I think Thicht Naht Hanh's whole chapter was about addressing the fact that oftentimes people, there's that misnomer of like, oh, you study Zen, isn't that all, but saying life is suffering, isn't that all about just suffering? And I think that for me, suffering, it gets a lot of emphasis in practice. And I think and part of it is there's a lot of teachings on that. Part of it is because we really could benefit from a lot of teachings on that. And when I think of my own practice, it's really my suffering that turned me towards deeply investigating the spiritual path. And I think that's true for most people. You might not necessarily label what turned you into this deep exploration or this journey into the spiritual path. You might not label it the word suffering or I want to figure out my dukkha, because we don't have that vocabulary, but generally there's some kind of form of something not right, something off kilter, some form of suffering that drives us into deep practice, deep exploration of that. I know that certainly, as I said, I know it was certainly true for me. That's definitely, some of you know my early story, but I kind of stumbled into practice in Dharma reign because I tried lots of different things and had what we call suffering in my life. And I had moved across the country to Boston and back, tried different relationships, different jobs, and finally realized that the common denominator was me, right? And all of that. So I was trying to find that happiness someplace else and realize, oh, wherever, it's that old slogan, wherever you go, there you are. So then I wanted to learn to meditate, and I just totally, I remember seeing an ad in Willamette Week for an intro to Zen meditation at Dharma reign, and I didn't even catch that it was Zen, and was quite surprised when I showed up at a Zen center. It was like, they're wearing robes, and what is going on here? And so, but I immediately, so I learned to meditate that day and was like, wow, there's something in this for me. There is something in it. But it was really my suffering, kind of this quality of giving up. And it's like, I might as like, I can't, there's no place to run away from this. So what is this? So that's what drove me into practice. And many of us have some version of that story often. And I think I noticed in my own practice, there's a lot of emphasis in investigating my own karmic patterns and causes of suffering. And what got kind of left behind for me is there's actually a practice of deliberately cultivating joy and appreciation. And they're not the same necessarily. They're related because, like, absence of suffering is good, right? And that can lead you to joy and appreciation, but it's not quite the same effort for me. One quote that I pulled out from the chapter we read last week is Thicht Naht Hanh attributes this to the Buddha. The Buddha says that he only wants us to recognize suffering. Let me start again. The Buddha says that he only wants us to recognize suffering when it is present and recognize joy when suffering is absent. I'll say that again. Wants us to recognize suffering when it is present and recognize joy when suffering is absent. And I would extend that to include, there's a way that we can deliberately turn our attention towards those moments of joy, alignment, relaxation, and lean into it and take that in and drink that in and help ourselves to remember the way, strengthen our ability to turn towards that. So it's not all about just removing suffering, but there's an effort that we expand and we open into that. So my talk is a little bit about how we do just that. So we're going to do something a little bit differently. Now I'm firing up the old computer here because what I'd like to do is two things. So take a moment to think of an experience or a time where you have touched that place of joy or appreciation. It could be something really simple, or it could be something like something unusual, a trip you took, or something like that. And so I'm going to have us take a moment to kind of bring that up and thinking about as complete a memory as you can, conjure up for that. And then I'm going to have us, I'm going to divide you into breakout groups and have you go around and share what is included in that moment of joy and appreciation. What made it so? What are the things that, what are the elements included in that? So trying to get at, like, what's the strawberry? What's that experience of grabbing that strawberry and tasting it? So I'm going to give us just like a minute to be quiet together and bring that experience up. And then I will send us off into short discussion rooms. So I'm just taking just literally like 1 minute. Looks like everybody is back. I'm going to unmute you all for a little bit here. I'm curious if anybody would be willing to share what kind of came out of your discussion, if that was what constitute joy for any of you.
You know, what I think was clear for all of us was it's those moments that you are totally in the moment, that no matter, like with Nancy with Penny skiing down the mountain, you know, you're thinking about cool air on your face and the snow, and you're not thinking about one other thing. Or if you're out on the water trying to steer the boat back in, you're not thinking about one other thing. You know, it really was really clear that it's those moments that you are so in the moment that it's almost as if you have forgot the whole rest of the world. You're just right there and nothing else is going on.
Good, a good synopsis.
Yep. Any other elements about how that comes up?
I think in our group, all three of us talked about the physical environment. There was a noticing of, well, like you were saying with Penny feeling the breeze on her face, like there was a noticing of what was happening in terms of physical sensation.
Well, and with us, it was all outdoors. We all had our moments of joy when we were outdoors.
Isn't that interesting? Because sometimes we don't get a chance to be outdoors, and then we're reminded of how much joy that brings.
Mm-hmm.
Any other common elements or anything else you noticed in the discussion?
I think there's different kinds of happiness and joys. Being in my bed with my cat and a book and my husband, it's not wildly exhilarating, like skiing or galloping cross country on a horse, which are all joyful experiences. But it's also very happy, contentment, and so for me, I think it's not always. I wouldn't always use the word joy for all the different forms of positive feelings.
Yeah, I was trying to kind of capture that quality of like appreciation or contentment.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, not wildly
Mm-hmm.
exciting sometimes.
But there are moments of not experiencing suffering.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
Another moment I was thinking about as you were talking, that was a little bit different from the one that I shared in our breakout room, was just resting on my bed or my couch and staring out the window and watching the wind like blow through the tree. Like I don't know. I do that every so often, and there's just, it's not like, yeah, it's not exhilarating or anything, but it does feel, there's some, just, I feel content, just those moments of just relaxing, Yeah.
I think there's an element that we mentioned of achievement, in the sense that the skiing, the camping, the campfire, the ability to get a small boat turned around in a storm and get back to shore. You feel like you've achieved something and survived.
That's so interesting. I thought you were going to make the opposite point, actually, that like at the campfire or in the boat, there's nothing to achieve, right? Yeah, but I know what you're saying in that, like,
Well,
yeah, that feels,
elaborate the opposite.
like it's kind of both, I think, sometimes, or there's like time goes away, there's nothing you need to go, nothing you need to do, no next moment that you're thinking about. But I also totally know that feeling of joy of like hiking to the top and seeing the waterfall. And an element of that joy is, I did it. I have a strong, healthy body. Oh God, I made it, you know? And that is actually a part of that joy. I think that maybe is what you're talking about too.
Yeah, I see both ends of that. And there's, I did it, or in other places, I didn't have to do anything, and it was just great. Yeah.
Well, I'll wrap up. I'm gonna. This feels strange and powerful. I'm gonna mute you all again, and just share my list. But mainly you touched on much of this. I realized one of the kind of prompting questions that would have led you to this is, so I asked you the question, what brings joy, right? Really open, what brings joy? If we were going to do a follow-up discussion, I would ask you to reflect on what brings joy in stressful, difficult times. Like, what brings, how do we touch that when it's hard to pull that up? And last week in our discussion, we touched on that a little bit. And, it's funny how the, circumstances align, because I have probably one of the most stressful work weeks I've had in quite some time. And I thought and I did find myself thinking, why did I pick this topic on joy and appreciation when I'm struggling this week? And I thought, oh, how beautiful. Actually, that is the challenge when I'm feeling time pressure and, all kinds of things going on. Like, that's when it's like, well, okay, this is when you really walk your talk, right? How can you turn towards that when all of a sudden you can create a lot of dialogue where that's just impossible. I cannot feel that in this circumstance. So what I noticed and what really helped me was thinking about our discussion from last week is that quality of acceptance. And not the quality of like, this is okay with me, but I'm under all these pressures, or we're in the middle of a global pandemic, but more of like, I recognize it, I see it. I remember Kyogen used to use the phrase a lot, being in non-opposition to circumstance. So much of my suffering, and I think a lot of people's sufferings, create that subtle layer of not this, I don't want this. I could be happy if this went away, then it would be all okay. If this circumstance, this difficult circumstance or person or deadline or whatever. So that quality of just like, this is the fabric of my life. This is, and I don't want to wish it away. That's the thing that I think can be kind of a trap. This like wanting to get through this until I get to the good stuff. It's like, this is actually the substance of my life. This deadline, these people, this thing, how can I just let go? Right before this talk, I had a family member call because their pet had passed away. And so I was going to do some final finishing touches on the talk. And I almost cut the conversation short, to tell you the truth. It kind of rose in my mind like, oh no. And I thought, oh, what's my practice for if not to be in this conversation with this person right now? That's, and so what's happening now is happening now, right? And it's fine. That's what my practice is for. And I was glad I kind of had that moment of like, oh yeah, remember. And so you can meet these moments. Yeah. So that quality of just, and I really had this moment after I hung up the phone of just like completely just letting go. Like, okay, this didn't go as planned. And this like complete, it's just a reminder of how we can do that. Same circumstances, same things going on, and just this complete open-handed letting go of like, okay. And if things don't go the way I want, I'm still okay. You're still okay. Just being right there in the midst of stress. So that really deep acceptance is not quite the word that captures it, but that quality of, yeah, this is my life, and I can say yes to it. Tara Brach has this great meditation in her book, Radical Acceptance, that I go back to again and again, which is, and she has it recorded too, about saying yes to this. Can I say yes to this? Doesn't mean that that's okay, or I'm not going to work to change it, whatever it is. But can I say yes in the way that I see this, and I am willing to be here and be with this. The other things on my list, we kind of touched on. We cultivate joy through, this came up really quite naturally about leaning into the experience of what we're experiencing through our senses. So leaning into just drinking in, like if I'm sitting on my balcony looking at the trees moving in the wind, just really drinking in, the green on the leaves and the pink on my geraniums and the breeze coming by, and how soft my chair feels, and just drinking that in, and we really train ourselves to know the way. One book that's really influenced me is Hardwiring Happiness, which gives you all these great, really detailed exercises of like taking a moment, even if we take 30 seconds to think, oh, I'm feeling really good right now, and how fleeting that moment can be, but to take 30 seconds to go like, and what makes it good, right? What makes it great? It's like, we can train ourselves to really know that place. The last, keeping an eye at the time, the last bigger point, and this is like our whole practice, right, is like, we find joy in not missing the moment, right? We find joy in coming back to center again and again and again, being here right now. Our Zazen practice helps us cultivate that. And all the practices that we do, that we build into our day and our life, that brings back to center. Just this. This is all we've got right now. I'm realizing that it's already 8:15, but I want to, so I didn't leave much room for discussion other than the stuff in the middle. But I wanted it to end by this really famous William Blake quote that you probably all know, but it kind of speaks to this topic. Goes like this: he who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. So, I love that. So that is my talk. I have, I'm going to unmute you all, maybe. I've lost the capacity to do that. All right. I apologize that I did not leave room for questions, and I don't want to hold you up, but are there any burning questions or comments? You have like a couple minutes maybe.
It's just a beautiful, beautiful Dharma talk tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
A little raw and loose this evening because I prepared in a different kind of way for tonight.
I love that we got to go into breakout rooms.
Oh, good.
I just wanted to mention that. That was really great.
Thank you for that feedback, because I like doing that. So I'll probably incorporate more of that. Yeah. Well, I guess I'll say the closing verse and then we'll say goodnight. So please make a show. Oops, I need to mute you all again. Maybe. All right. Now I'm muted. Oh, here we go. Abiding in this ephemeral world, like a lotus in muddy water, the mind is pure and goes beyond. Thus we bow to Buddha. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha, prajna, paramita. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to unmute you all. So you can say thank you for being here and have a nice